Okay. All right. This piece called Endings. Can you give me the genesis of it?
Well, it's got quite a long history, really. Well, a long trajectory leading up to it. In that I've been writing a series of pieces which set the ends of works of literature. And I realised after a while that I had enough of them to form a body of work to put into a concert. And it wasn't just the ends of literary works. It was I've got quite a fascination in my work with the whole thing about how you end a piece, about cadence, about that's harmonic cadence, but also how you string out the ending of a piece, if you like. Because very often my pieces they go on for a long time, the ends of the pieces. So I thought I could make a feature of that and turn it into a kind of set of pieces to be performed together.
All right, good answer. We might go back on that one at the end of this
Sure.
when you've settled into it. Tell me a bit about your choice of those particular texts.
Well, that's interesting because they came about one at a time almost.
Can you start that by saying,
yeah.
as it were, my choice of text came out, so
Yes.
you start with and you clean in?
Yes. My choice of texts came about rather one at a time rather than all together. It started when I was asked to write a piece for a friend's wedding. David Gale was getting married to Deborah Levy, they're both writers. And David asked me to set the end of Joyce's Ulysses, which is the famous ending, Molly Bloom's soliloquy, and he liked a setting for his wedding. So I duly did that. I made a song from that speech. Then a couple of years later, I was commissioned by the BBC to do a nocturne, and I was looking at texts which kind of talked about night falling, and I found by chance the end of Jack Kerouac's On the Road, and I can't remember now how I chanced upon the end of that, but it's a fantastic evocative description of night falling across America. And I didn't eventually use that text for that nocturne that I was writing for the BBC, but I kept that in mind, and I later set that particular text to music. So I had two ends of books. And so this idea of endings kind of started forming itself in my mind. And I searched about for some other endings of books. And so I started looking at ends of books specifically with that in mind. Really, that was the first time. And I'd been reading Don DeLillo's, a couple of Don DeLillo books, but one particularly, White Noise, where I realised the end of that book would work very well as well. And I wasn't quite clear exactly what was making them suitable at the time. And I've come to realise later it's a very particular sort of thing it needs to be. It shouldn't be to do with the particularly closely tied to the narrative, because the people listening won't necessarily know the story, they won't know the characters. So it's got to be somehow separated from that and stand on its own. But those are three very different endings, as it were. And so gradually these pieces came together, and I realised that I had enough for a concert programme.
Tell me about the ensemble that you used. For example, whether they'd worked before, whether that particular configuration of instruments was appropriate, and why,
Yes, sure. The ensemble, Regular Music 2, is the name really is used by me nowadays as a kind of umbrella for the musical projects that I do. It started out as an original ensemble many, many years ago called Regular Music, which then disbanded in the mid-80s. It was then reformed, Regular Music 2, in the 1990s, with the addition of some singers. And since then, I've done several projects which use loosely the same kind of lineup, the same kind of instruments, and some of the same people, but not always. So regular music too now becomes something that I use as an umbrella for my projects, where I'm working with several of the same musicians, usually, for example, Melanie Pappenheim, one of the singers I work with, and I've worked with for years. Charles Hayward is, again, a regular member of Regular Music too. Ashley Slater, but then other musicians I bring in as and when. But the lineup you see there is very much established as a favourite lineup of mine. It's keyboards, usually piano and electric keyboards, strings, brass with saxophones and brass instruments, percussion and singers, and plus electric guitar a lot of the time.
Now, singers are obviously essential in this piece. You choose to have two. Is it obvious how the spoils are divided between the two singers? You know, do they have... They seem to have complementary roles to me, but what was your thinking as how you wrote the piece?
Yes, they very much do.
Go back and introduce it with the notion of singers.
Okay. Yeah, the use of singers. I've worked a lot with singers. I like setting text. I like working with singers. Sometimes I've worked with 4 singers, sometimes 3, sometimes 2, and occasionally like a couple of these pieces are written for solo voice. We ended up with 2. We were going to have more than 2 singers for this project, and it was purely a financial decision. We, as usual, I like to think big and have as many musicians as I can, and often the constraints are financial. So I was sort of having to see if I could cut that down, and actually coming out with 2 singers for this project worked very well, because I could get that sense of dialogue between the singers while also being able to... Oh, I've lost it now.
No, that's good. Actually, I think we've got something there. You had
Have we?
Point.
Yes.
And
okay.
we will go through it all again.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go into the rehearsals that we filmed. You had a finite number of rehearsals. Now, in the rehearsals, I'm just going to adjust very slightly. In the rehearsals, how did things develop? Was it always predictable the way things would develop? And I'm talking now without reference to Kaffe necessarily, which we'll bring in.
Okay, well, no, the rehearsals, aside from the relationship with Kaffe, which was a very particular aspect of these rehearsals, aside from that, the rehearsals went as they normally do. We don't meet that regularly as a group. There were lots of new performers in this particular project. So part of the initial rehearsals is us getting used to working together as an ensemble. And we bash through the material, and we then start fine-tuning. And that's what we do a lot of the time, and really working on the relationship between the instruments, the balance, the tightness, all those sort of things. And also bringing in some of the slight variables that we've got already there, like Charles Hayward's contribution on drums. Those sort of things we need to work on in rehearsal rather than fixing them beforehand. But a lot of the time it's simply straightforward, bang, bang, getting the notes, getting them right, getting the ensemble working well together.
Okay, now, the unusual element here is Kaffe. At what point was Kaffe conceived to be part of the project? How did that come about? How did you introduce each other? Blah, 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 blah. Yeah?
Yes, the Kaffe's involvement in the project came about because having decided that I wanted to make a kind of put together several pieces, several settings of endings and several pieces which are about endings together in one program, I also started thinking about different ways or a new way of presenting the music. So I was looking for something that uses the conventional concert format. I write quite a lot of music and theatre or theatrical presentation of music. This wasn't music theatre. This is a concert, first and foremost. But I'm quite interested in exploring different ways of presenting a concert. And also, I'm interested in electronics. I've never used electronics myself. I'm not an electronic musician particularly. And apart from electric keyboards and so forth, I don't really use electronics. But I'm interested in electronics, and I'm interested in the combination of acoustic and electronic music. And so I thought of a way of incorporating it, and I thought I should find an electronic composer and collaborate. And I started thinking about the electronic composers I knew, and Kaffe Matthews really sprung to mind, whose work I'd known for many years, seen her several times performing, and really like her work, the richness of her work, the quality of the sounds that she produces. So, and I knew that Charles Hayward, the drummer, had worked previously with Kaffe, and I rang him up and said, what do you think? Was it a good time you had working with Kaffe, and what do you think about bringing her in to this? And he was all for it. He said it's a great idea. He really enjoyed working with Kaffe. So I phoned Kaffe and said, remember me? Because we had met. We don't know each other very well, but we had met through mutual friends years before, and said, how about it? And she was very interested. So that's how it came about.
When you met her and we filmed you, what expectations did you have as to how technically she might engage with the ensemble?
Well, that was all a bit of an unknown quantity.
Go back and start that as a new sentence, if you would.
Yeah. How do you mean? Yes. Well,
Kaffe's
okay.
involvement was...
Yeah. Oh, Kaffe's involvement, working together, how we were going to work together, was very much an unknown quantity when we first met. Neither of us knew quite how this was going to turn out. And we'd had some discussion about... I'd talked to her about such things as the electronics providing a layering, an additional richness to the acoustic sound, and also making links between pieces. But that's about as far as I knew at the time, and as far as I described it to Kaffe. So very much we were both feeling our way as to what this might be, how this might work out. And so our initial discussions were talking about ideas, listening to the recordings of the pieces that I'd made, and trying out various different sorts of ideas with those, before Kaffe then went away and developed some material to bring to the rehearsals.
Okay, when one thing, of course, is that in an ideal world you might have had more rehearsals, but a certain rough energy is introduced when things are still in a very kinetic state, which I sense they were. Can you talk about that, both in rehearsal and in the performances, as things were getting more and more coherent as the repeated efforts went on?
We knew when we started the rehearsal process that we would be developing this as we went along. And we also knew that we had a fairly limited amount of time. So, and we realised during rehearsal that actually we could easily have done with more time. But this is ever the case. So it tends to focus your mind. You really start working, in the moment when developing things. And certainly in rehearsal, there was quite a lot of because of the tight time frame, of feeling that we could, if we'd had longer, we would have worked quite a lot more probably on things like exactly dovetailing the two elements, the electronic and the acoustic, and working on layering, working on balance, and working on the material and how it worked. However, with a limited time, we simply went for it, and in a sense, very often I find that produces fantastic results, or certainly results which are very dynamic and as you said, very kinetic. So I suppose had we more time, and if we do it again, we will have more time, we will be working more on that relationship. But as it was, I liked the idea of being surprised by what Kaffe did. And I thought that was very good for me as a composer who, like many composers, likes to fix things and really get them down on paper and fixed in our minds. It was a very good process for me to be surprised by Kaffe's more interactive, on the spur of the moment, improvisatory input.
Excellent. I'm just going to make a small adjustment here. Take one channel down just a tad. Just give me a level. I'm just taking one channel down.
Yeah, one channel down. Is that better? Like that?
Keep going.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's good.
That's speaking. Okay. All right.
Now, how did the musicians react to this? I mean, I don't know whether many of them had worked in this kind of context before. The singers, for example, how did they react to finding this element that seized on their contributions and played it back to them?
In the moment, as we were, putting the piece.
I'm just going to fiddle for
Yes.
1 second.
No. I'll start that again.
Okay, same question.
So for the performers, it was also quite a new experience working with acoustic material which they'd learnt and which were pieces, some of which we'd performed before without electronics, and so for bringing in the electronic element, it was a very new thing for the performers, and certainly there was for them what they heard in rehearsal and in the sound check and during the performance was something of a surprise. And there was quite a lot, I think, of uncertainty amongst the performers, and indeed about a bit between Kaffe and I about the material, how it was gelling together, whether it was complementing each other or fighting each other too much. And I think for that was quite a challenge for the performers, particularly the singers, I think. But hearing the results afterwards, when you hear the whole thing as a whole, when you've got a bit of distance from it, it's an amazingly rich result, this additional elements that Kaffe's electronics bring to the music.
If you were to do it again, it would probably be different, even if you tried to make it exactly the same. What ways might it be different, and how might that be, with a gap of many months, an improvement on what you've done?
One of the things I really liked about this project was the fact that it had this improvisatory element to it, this very dynamic, in the moment ability of Kaffe to interact with us live and create something that could be new and could be renewed and different each time. So if we were to do it again, there would be new relationships, new things to explore, and that's a fantastic thing for me. It's a new place for me to be in, really, and a very exciting one. If we were to do it again, I would enjoy probably spending more time working on the detail, working on the things which work particularly well and bringing those out. But also, I would like to maintain that element of spontaneity there in the performance. Kaffe's got several roles that she plays. She brings a great richness to the...
Go back to Kaffe's got several roles.
Yeah.
Can I
Kaffe's,
just lean a tad?
yes.
That's good.
Kaffe interacts with the material in several different ways. Some of the time, in a couple of the pieces, she is replicating or performing a part that was originally intended in the piece. For example, in And the Days Are Long, there's a cello part which wasn't there in the performance, and I deliberately left that out and asked Kaffe to fill that role, as it were. Other times she's adding new layers which weren't conceived of at all when I wrote the pieces. So there's that. I've lost my place now.
No, that's all good.
What,
that's good.
what was I? What was the question? What was the question?
So don't worry.
Yeah.
Final question on this run.
Yes.
Is have you had feedback from Kaffe or anyone else subsequent to that? Have you, a month later spoken on the phone and she's said what she feels about how it went and how it might go again?
We haven't had that conversation yet. And
Well, go
it'd
back
be good.
and say,
yes.
Inevitably,
Yeah.
Kaffe and I will be having
Yeah.
such a conversation about it.
Yeah.
But actually, we haven't even had this yet.
Yes.
But,
Kaffe and I will be talking about how the project yet. We haven't actually had that conversation
So start
yet.
again.
Yeah.
My fault. Question is,
Yes.
have you and Kaffe discussed it and had a sort of post-mortem? And you said, well, we obviously will
Yes.
analyse it, but we haven't, funny enough, done that yet.
Yeah. Kaffe and I will be talking about how the project went and having a post-mortem and thinking about how we might develop the project. We haven't done that yet, and I'm looking forward to that conversation.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to, before we change size, to go back over the very first question,
Yeah.
which is, tell me, simple terms, what the genesis was of this whole project.
Endings as a project came about gradually over a period of years when I realised that I had set the ends of a couple of books and also my instrumental work, it does focus very much on endings, on cadence, and that's a kind of it's a particular focus that I'm interested in. And so I realised after a while that I had enough settings of ends of books and pieces the end of which was a very much a feature of the piece to make a concert programme. And having realised that, I thought, well, I'll make a project out of this.
And at what point did it become ensemble plus sampled electronics?
I decided to, having lighted on this concept of endings and putting several settings of ends of books together in a concert programme, I was also looking at ways of presenting a concert programme in a new and different way. And the third element to put into the mix was that I was interested in electronics and hadn't really used much electronics in my work. But I'm very interested in that sound world, the richness of that world and what it can bring. So I thought I should collaborate with an electronic artist. And so all these three things came together and really was then it became the real focus of the piece, the setting of the endings and also collaborating with somebody else, an electronic artist, and creating a whole set of pieces together.
Excellent. Okay, if you're up for it, I will go in tighter.
Yeah.
And that's it. Sit yourself down comfortably.
Yeah.
Okay, that looks very nice indeed. I might actually, if you've moved, stop you because I need to find you. And
Yes.
as I'm not actually behind the camera.
Yes,
can't
okay.
adjust so easy. That's
Yeah.
fine. All right, so we're going to do that first question again. So tell me about the genesis of this project, please.
Endings came about gradually, really, over quite a long period. I set the first ending of a book 15 years ago. And some years later set another one.
No, you say, look at me. You were looking down. Let's start that again.
Yes,
And
let's
make
start
a
that
bit
again.
more eye contact.
Indeed,
That
yes.
was meant.
Sorry.
That was just not at your glasses. Here we go. Let's start
that
one
again.
more with eye
Okay.
contact to me. Okay.
Yes. Endings came about over a long period of time. I set the end of...
So I'm going to change something. My fault.
yes, sure.
Okay. This time I will not stop you.
The Endings project came about over a long period of time. I set the first end of a work of literature several years ago, and over the years have set a couple more until I had a group of pieces where I thought, well, I could put these together in a program. And I liked the idea of a focus for a concert program on a particular theme, which was the ends of books, of writing, of pieces of writing, and the concept of endings as a whole. I had some other pieces where the focus was very much on how a piece of music ends, the cadence of a piece. And so the whole idea of the concept of something coming to an end, which has obvious relationships with death and so forth, the end of a life, but also this whole idea of winding something up gradually, seemed to be a really good focus for a set of pieces which would work together as a whole in a concert program.
Wouldn't be a bad idea if I asked you in the course of a sentence to list what some of the source materials were, because it may not be obvious to people
Sure.
who didn't have the programme in front of them.
Sure.
So
the first ending of a book that I set was James Joyce Ulysses, and that was, I was asked to set that by a friend, the writer David Gale, who's getting married to Deborah Levy, who's also a writer, and they wanted the end of Molly Bloom's soliloquy, the famous ending of Joyce's Ulysses, to be sung at their wedding. So I set that to music. And the next ending I set was Jack Kerouac's On the Road. I'd been commissioned to write a nocturne for the BBC, and I was looking at texts which dealt with twilight and night time, and just happened to chance upon that text. And I didn't use it for the nocturne, but later I came back to it when I thought, well, it's an end of a book, and I've already set one end, so why don't I try and set the end of another book? Completely different from each other, no particular relationship, but they're both ends of books. So Kerouac's On the Road was the second one. And then I started looking particularly for ends of books which would lend themselves well to be set, and chanced upon Don DeLillo's White Noise. And the text needs to be something which doesn't necessarily refer too much to the narrative, to the story, because the audience is only hearing the ending. They might not know the story. And so it needs to be something that's slightly abstracted, more poetic, probably, than a simple, straightforward narrative. And those three endings in their different ways do certainly fulfill that brief.
Excellent. Okay. Tell me a bit about the history of the ensemble.
Regular Music 2 is these days is a kind of it's an umbrella title which I use for my projects. It did originally exist as an ensemble. The first version was simply Regular Music, way back in the 80s, which then disbanded and was reformed as Regular Music 2. And it's now I use the title as to cover many of my projects. So it doesn't meet so regularly, curiously enough, but and often has slightly different lineups. But the lineup for this particular project was my classic lineup, if you like, of strings, keyboards, piano, brass, and saxophone, percussion and voices. and this time with electric guitar, which I also like to use sometimes.
Okay, there are two singers. Why two rather than one?
With two singers, or at least more than one singer, you get this ability to have a dialogue between the singers. There's quite a lot of my pieces where they are kind of answering each other or taking turns with the material. Other times they're working very much together. And I like writing for singers. I mean, sometimes I will write for 3 or 4 singers. The fact that we used 2 here was largely a financial decision, just needing to limit the huge ensemble that I would like to be using. But it worked very well for this piece. It was very I've lost it.
Well,
Sorry.
you came to an end there.
Yeah. Okay.
Interestingly, I think if you get more singers and it becomes a choral piece, you end up with something like Glasses, the Desert Music, and you've lost the fact that there are individuals. It becomes a choir.
Yes.
Even once you get beyond about 4, perhaps.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about these rehearsals then, and how the rehearsals got underway, and then
Could we talk a bit about the electronic versus?
That's a good
Yes.
moment to do
Yeah.
that. Okay. Yes, good thinking.
So I wanted to bring electronics into the work because I'm fascinated by electronics, and I very much am attracted to that sound world, but I'm not a part of it. I don't work with electronics. But also, this project I found as we went along is quite a different way of working than much electroacoustic music. There's quite a lot of electroacoustic music which combines acoustic with electronic, but usually those are put together at the same time, so that they're conceived and developed usually by one person, writing the acoustic music, manipulating the electronics, and bringing them together as a whole. This was quite different in that most of the acoustic music was already written, was already there, existing as a piece of music. And so the electronics was an added element, which added layers, added a kind of richness and depth to the music, but also changed it, took it into a different place. And that, I feel, is something that I was really excited by and was really felt worked very well. It was a bit of a step in the dark because I didn't know quite how it was going to work, and also quite a challenge because as a composer I'm quite precious about my work, about there it is. I want it to be exactly like this and I want to have control over it. And here I was letting go and letting someone mess it up, if you like, add additional elements. But it was a very liberating experience for me, and I really liked the fact that it was unpredictable, that there was very spontaneous what Kaffe was bringing to the finished product, and that each time it could change and develop. And there was a lot of very rich material which Kaffe brought, and during rehearsals and performance I would hear this new sound and be very excited by those combinations, and it fitted better than I thought it ever would.
Excellent. Okay, going back to that first encounter with Kaffe when you sketched out the nature of the collaboration, can you remember what sort of things were raised, and maybe then go on to say how in practice those things were reinforced, or perhaps they were left behind and new elements of collaboration took place?
When we first started talking about it, Kaffe and I both found it quite hard to imagine exactly how this would end up. I said to Kaffe that I wanted her to create some additional layers to the sound. There were some pieces which required specific things for Kaffe to do. She was replacing some element which had been preconceived. But a lot of the time it was simply, let's see if we can put this acoustic music in a different space, in a different place, add elements, add layers, but also create linking passages between the pieces so that Kaffe would have a space then for her to really create something which was on a more equal footing with the acoustic works. So when we first started talking about it, we didn't really know how that was going to work. We had a rather vague idea. So when we first met, it was listening to the acoustic pieces, thinking about the kinds of sounds which were going to work, which were going to complement, not get in the way, not fight with the acoustic material. And we talked a lot about the kind of sounds. Oh, we can imagine this sort of sound here happening. And the sorts of things that Kaffe might then sample from the live performers, some of those sounds as well. One of the features of the eventual endings performance was the sound of bells. We started the whole concert with a piece, Tam Tam and Bells, which is 4 tam tam plus handbells, and Kaffe grabbed some of that material and used it and brought it back in different layers throughout the whole concert. But also she created her own electronic bell sounds, which she would throw around the space as well. So those sorts of things emerged from our discussions, but also from the material that was already there.
Was there a point at any moment where she was proposing things that you weren't keen on and you decided that you'd steer her off that, or did you on the whole respond positively to everything she brought to the discussion?
I recall from our first meeting how much we kind of clicked in terms of our ideas. I don't think there were any ideas that Kaffe was suggesting and I was thinking, oh, I don't know about that. And my feeling is, you'll have to ask Kaffe, but I think she felt the same way. We seemed to be on the same wavelength. She would suggest some things, play some things, and I would immediately see that they would fit very well. I mean, I think I already, in approaching Kaffe, I'd already, in my mind, hers was very much the area of electronic sound and music that was attracted to. There's a lot of electronic music I don't like so much, but hers has a great kind of organic, earthy richness to it, often used by taking real sound and manipulating it rather than creating it absolutely from scratch. So already I think there was something that I knew about her work which I thought would work well. And yes, I was very, very pleased with the ideas that she brought.
Now, with a piece of music where the kinetic and the improvised, if you like, are essential elements, there is always the thought that if you do it again, it's not like a string quartet which you've got to perfection and you want to match that earlier one. Every time there is a potential for something a little different. What kind of ways might it be developed further, do you think, if you were to do it again in a few months' time?
I think the way we might develop this project would have a lot to do with the space that we were working with. I mean, we felt we didn't have a great deal of time. We had very little time in each of the spaces. And of course, each of the performance spaces, we did it 3 times.
I guess this performance. Let's start off by saying we did it 3 times and name the 3 places.
Yes.
And then you were about to make a point how site-specific it is. So future things the extra element is the element of the specific location. I think that's where you were heading there.
The recent performances we've done, we performed in 3 different venues, all very different from each other. the Dillawa Pavilion in Bexhill, the Purcell Room at the South Bank Centre in London, and the Arnold Feeney in Bristol, all quite different spaces. And this piece is very much really uses the space. Kaffe's sound is all around the audience. And if we were to develop this piece, I think what I would like to particularly work on is working in the space and designing it for the space. We didn't have a great deal of time setting up in each of these spaces to really fine-tune that, as it were. And I think there might have been some balance issues. And sometimes if a member of the audience is sitting fairly close to a speaker, they were getting, some kind of more of the speaker than they could from the stage and so forth. I think we would work very much on that. Because what this project does, it allows us to play with the space that the audience is in. And the fact that the acoustic sound, in any case, is amplified and is coming from speakers, and Kaffe's sound can be moved all the way around the space. Something that I think is a very rich area for development.
But the score, the texts, and the configuration of instruments has now gelled. Is this something you'd like to be a fixed given if you were to do it again?
Yes, the lineup that we have at the moment works very well. I would, if we had, if we were to do it again, there was a limitless budget. I would obviously, being me, would bring in a couple more musicians, a live percussionist, as well as Charles Hayward on drums. Maybe bring back those two other singers, but essentially the instrumentation works well, and what I like is the fact that Kaffe's music will always bring a kind of dynamic, unexpected element, which can change and develop the pieces each time we do it.
Did you and she, while you were together, talk to each other about the possibility of collaboration on anything that's completely different and new?
We haven't talked about collaborating on a new project as yet. I think this is, for us, was very much a new thing, and I, for one, am very, very pleased as to how it's gone, and I would like to do this project a few more times. Put more performances in different spaces, and which will naturally be slightly different each time. Whether or not we go on then to do a piece collaborating together, I think it could work really well, but we haven't discussed that yet.
Is there anything you'd like to add? I think we've covered the things
I
you
don't.
said we would.
Yeah, I think so.
Hey,
I think we have.
Well, that was good.
Good. Sorry about drying up a couple of times.